what's new? The stuff that came out, we've heard about for weeks. We've heard about VAT on schools, non-dom taxation, overseas property investors getting clobbered, corporation taxes being capped, no increase on income tax, national insurance, VAT. Am I missing something? It seems to be stuff we've already heard before.
Well, we all knew that this manifesto was going to be a very sort of softly, gently approach. Keir Starmer has a almost completely clear path to number 10 at the moment. And the last thing he wants to do is announce some new unexpected policy which is going to upturn the apple cart and prevent him getting that super majority he's planning on. But I think this manifesto was even more sort of lacking in content than we were expecting. As you say, pretty much every single policy commitment had been pre-trailed, in some cases years ago. I mean, some of these promises Keir Starmer made when he first became leader of the opposition. I think what's interesting about it is when you look carefully at his tax promises, obviously Labour have promised over the last few years some pretty expensive things. Their wraparound childcare, their huge expansion of nursery places added on to primary schools, their supervised teeth brushing, all of these things, these cost money. And Keir Starmer has repeatedly said, and he said again this morning, that he will not be raising income tax, national insurance or VAT. But obviously, without some sort of financial miracle, some taxes will have to be raised or public spending will have to be cut. And I thought it was really interesting today how Keir Starmer, A, didn't rule out public spending cuts. He said that the Labour Party, won't be the party of austerity, but it does sound as though public spending cuts are on the horizon. But also, it became pretty clear that the Labour Party is planning tax rises. It might not be any of those three big taxes, but it will be almost certainly council tax rises, which can be very painful indeed, fuel duty rises, which obviously there are many people who feel already that there's a war on motorists. Well, that could be about to get worse. And capital gains tax, so that's the tax on wealth. It'll be really interesting to see when Labour decides to implement those tax rises, because they are definitely coming.
And do you think this is part of the downside of being so far ahead? He doesn't have to do a big reveal. There doesn't have to be a massive golden globe on the table to make us drool. This is about not spooking the horses. He's been called Captain Cautious for this budget, this manifesto, beg your pardon, today. Jeremy Hunt's called it a tax trap manifesto. Well, that's a bit rich. They've been raising taxes to the highest level since World War II. Is the detail the stuff we're not seeing? For example, there's nothing in there about caps or sizes of immigration targets.
Well, exactly. And actually, Chris Hope, our political editor, asked Keir Starmer a question a little bit earlier. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Chris at GB News.
Chris Hope, GB News. Keir Starmer, you're so far ahead in the polls. Should we prepare for a one-party socialist state, as the Tories say? And is that a good thing? And also, just quickly, you want to reduce net migration. What on earth does that mean? Is that below 100,000 a year?
Look, Chris, let's reject the cynicism of the Tory campaign. All they want to do in a general election is to suppress the vote. I know that not a single vote has been cast in this election. Polls don't predict the future, and every single vote has to be earned. And we will earn it with our plan for growth, our plan for creation of wealth in the future.
Well, as you heard there was quite a lot of laughter about the idea of sort of one-party socialist state. But it does look very much as though Keir Starmer really could be heading for a super majority. And it would be really interesting to see what happens in Parliament if that were to happen, because we haven't really seen anything like that since 1997. And actually, some people are suggesting that Labour's majority this time around could be even bigger than 1997. What sort of policies will the Labour Party introduce that they're not mentioning yet if that supermajority comes to pass? As for the immigration question, well, Starmer forgot to answer it there. He did actually come back to it a little bit later, and I think we'll hear that in the next hour. Let's just say it wasn't the clearest answer I've ever heard.
And I also think that the big majority will allow them to do basically whatever they want. So we might not have any painful tax rises in this manifesto. Why would they do that? Why would they spook the electorate when they have victory so close to their grasp, but with a massive majority that would dwarf even Boris Johnson's majority? Then, Olivia, they could push through anything they wanted.
Well, exactly. And there are some places where the Labour Party, Rachel Reeves in particular, has tied her hands. I mean, it would be very difficult now for the Labour Party to raise any of those three main taxes. But there are lots and lots of areas where they have deliberately kept the canvas as blank as possible. They want to have free rein to do what they want if and when they come to power, and if they do get this super majority. And I think we should all be looking at what's going to happen with public spending, because interestingly, it does look a little bit as though Labour could be heading for the sort of public spending decisions that George Osborne and David Cameron made back in 2010.
Excellent stuff, Olivia Utley, always brilliant as usual. Now let's quickly cross over to the Tories responded to Labour's manifesto, and Chief Secretary to the Treasury Laura Trott says the Labour government would land the country with its biggest ever tax burden.
This is Labour's tax trap manifesto. It only contains tax rises, no tax cuts. Under Labour's own published figures, it will take the tax burden to levels never seen before in this country. And that doesn't even include the £2,000 of taxes which they're going to levy on every working family across the country.
So there we go, the Tories strike back. And let's talk to a man who was a Labour MP when they last produced an election-winning manifesto. That man is Stephen Pound. Stephen, welcome to the show. Always a delight. So you were there back in the glory days of Blairism and when there was a lot of money in the biscuit tin. Now, Stephen, we have a very, very different situation. The cupboard is bare. Old Mother Hubbard, Sir Keir Starmer, came out today. There's nothing new in this, but a lot of people are saying, is this supermajority the kind of tiger in the reeds, if you like? Will that give Sir Keir Starmer the power to push through any old tax rise he wants down the line?
Absolutely not. I mean, you're quite right, Mike. I was a Blair babe, and I was there at that time. And fair play to John Major, there was a few bob in the kitty at that particular time. But look, the key thing about this manifesto, what for me the overwhelming thing is it's actually one for the future. It's no good coming up with empty promises like Corbynite nonsense that we heard in the Conservative manifesto. We're going to actually, on the one hand, cut taxation, on the one hand, actually improve public services, when you can't do both. What's good about this is it's actually about increasing the size of the cake before we start slicing the cake up. Now, we've heard from Laura Trott that this absolute risible nonsense about the £2,000 over 4 years, which, as you know, anyone with a calculator would work out it's actually about 40 quid a year. And it simply isn't, the crushing blow that the Tories would like us to see. But look, what's big about this is, yes, it is as steady as she goes. A manifesto. I can't argue with that. And it was interesting that the manifesto launch was heckled, by a rabid Corbynite, because I think that just shows how far we've gone as a party. But look, the reality is we can't succeed in this country unless we have growth. Growth is the single most important thing. We can't spend anything until we've actually earned it first. It's a fairly basic principle that, in all honesty, Margaret Thatcher actually enunciated quite well. So this is about growth. And when I look at in the detail, the stuff for small business, the stuff about business rates, that to me is actually invigorating. It could actually save the high street and we could actually improve our quality of life, because you've got to build from the bottom up. You can't simply say, as the Tories have said, we're going to slash taxes, but somehow, magically, mysteriously, on some strange alchemy, we're going to actually improve public services with less money. I'm sorry, that's for the birds.
And yet, Stephen, what's happened with the dreaded fiscal drag, of course, is that as wages have gone up, as inflation has gone up, more and more ordinary, hard-working people have been dragged into higher rate tax brackets. It's OK to cap taxes, but as sure as night follows day, more people will pay those higher taxes because inflation, just like death and taxes, is inevitable. And so, therefore, nurses, teachers, policemen, policewomen, they'll be dragged into top percent tax rates. That doesn't sound like a Labour government to me. That sounds like a Conservative government.
Martin. Like you, I weep for the tube train drivers. I weep for those RMP people who are going to be earning over 70 grand a year and are going to be dragged through this process that you quite accurately describe as fiscal drag. But look, to be honest, if somebody's earning an extra 20 grand a year and they pay an extra 4,000 grand a year on top of that, they're still £16,000 a year better off. I'm sorry. Fiscal drag is actually a sign of success of an economy. At the present time, we've got a race to the bottom, not a race to the top. But it's always good to hear you speak up for the plucky tube train drivers. Fair play to you.
No, not just the tube train drivers. I'm talking about nurses, policemen, policewomen, a lot of ordinary, hard-working people who never would consider themselves high-rate taxpayers, Stephen, are now finding themselves in that bracket because of inflation. And what I'm saying to you is that that isn't addressed in this manifesto today. It carries on. It steadies the ship. It's Jeremy Hunt's plan, but with a red rosette.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry about it. Look, the key thing here is that how do you actually reduce inflation? Quite simply by actually stressing instability. As you know, inflation is an aspect, it's a symptom of insecurity. It's a time when you don't have confidence in the economy, then people stop spending or they start investing in gold or paintings or God knows what. So if we actually manage to achieve some sort of stability, some economic fiscal stability in this country, then inflation will fall. And it's already falling at the moment. I mean, fair play to the people in the Treasury at the present time. So the idea that we have to actually throttle back on this whole policy of building from the bottom up and actually increase the economy because some people might end up paying more tax. I'm sorry, I just simply don't buy that. I think most people would actually say, do you know, I'd actually like to see a few police officers. I'd like to actually see my hospital working. I'd actually like to see, our streets kept clean. I'd actually like to see those improvements in public services. And the Tories have promised that. But at the same time, they said that they cut taxes. You can't do that. You simply can't square that circle. This is, sure, you can criticise this manifesto as a steady as she goes, steady as a ship one. But in all honesty, Martin, you've been there in government. You've been an elected, member of the European Parliament. You know the realities of this thing. You can't actually achieve anything unless you have that stability to start with. And you can't achieve stability unless you have the majority. And at the moment, it's ours to lose. The Labour Party is there. We could lose this. Well, of course we could. We're bloody good at losing elections. But in all honesty, this seems to be a sober, sensible, mature manifesto that I'm pretty quite happy to sign up for. Although within 15 seconds of the manifesto being launched, I got a message from Conservative headquarters, from the Labour Party saying, can you make a contribution to our election fund? And I agreed. I think it's worth it for the country.
Okay.